Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So today I read a very important article in the Washington Post. I encourage you all to read that article. I will include a link in the description box. That article includes a video with some very important information. So again, I encourage you all to read that article because it goes into depth, more depth than I will provide in this video. So today, U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced that he is instructing federal prosecutors to pursue the most severe penalties against drug offenders and other criminal defendants. And these severe penalties include mandatory minimum sentences and other harsh penalties. Now, I often hear people say that the Obama administration did nothing for Black people. And often, most of these people who say this are completely uninformed, they're ignorant, and they just don't know the facts. The fact of the matter is, the Obama administration implemented criminal justice reforms, such as helping to pass the Fair Sentencing Act, which reduced the sentencing disparities between powder cocaine and crack cocaine. And as many people know, those disparities help to exacerbate the problem of mass incarceration in Black communities. Those disparities targeted Black and minority communities. So it was very necessary to address that disparity problem. And that's something that the Obama administration did. And also, what they did is they changed policy in terms of how the Justice Department would deal with drug offenders. For instance, they instructed their federal prosecutors not to pursue certain charges in order to avoid problems like mandatory minimums, which result in many African Americans being harshly sentenced for drug offenses, non-violent drug offenses. And so what has happened now is Jeff Sessions has basically reversed those policies under the Obama era and is now basically making it clear that they are going to be much more strict and much more harsh than the Obama administration when it comes to the so-called war on drugs. And Jeff Sessions basically is saying that this is necessary because there's some kind of spike in crime. There's fear of more violence associated with the drug trade. But all the statistical data goes against his arguments. For instance, FBI reports, as noted in this Washington Post article that I referenced earlier, say that violent crime between 1993 and 2015 has declined by 50%. But see, what happens is this. You have people like Jeff Sessions and other people on the right. They take the examples of Chicago and places like Baltimore, and they try to use those examples to try to make it seem like there's a problem with violence nationwide, a problem that needs to be addressed on a mass scale. So you have these people calling for law and order. And what happens in this call for law and order, Black people bear the burden of that call. This so-called war on drugs is nothing but a war on Black people. Even though, as Michelle Alexander points out in her masterpiece, The New Jim Crow, even though Black people and white people use and sell drugs at similar rates, Black communities are the ones that are targeted when it comes to law enforcement. They concentrate their efforts on arresting Black people, thereby destroying Black communities. When people are mass incarcerated, Black families are ripped apart. It's a war on Black people because, again, it's not these drug laws are not applied fairly. They are not applied universally. They are applied primarily towards Black people and other people of color. That's a war on Black people. Instead of having a war on Black people, a so-called war on drugs, what they need is a war on poverty. Because this war on drugs is a complete failure. Despite all these people being locked up in massive numbers. Despite that, you still have drugs being sold on the streets of America with no end in sight. You still have people using drugs. So that war on drugs is a complete failure. Every day I'm reminded of how that war on drugs is a failure. When we hear those reports of all these people suffering from so-called opioid addiction and other addictions, when I go downtown in Baltimore and I see people walking around like the living dead, like zombies, stupefied under the influence of heroin and other harsh drugs, I know that that war on drugs is a failure. The real way to fight against crime and to fight against the problems plaguing these communities is to fight against poverty. Poverty is what drives people into the drug trade often. When people have no education, when people have no opportunities to pursue jobs, to pursue a future, to have hope, they get caught up in the drug trade. They start selling drugs, and all the problems that go along with that follow. Problems of violence, problems of addiction, and it's a vicious cycle of destruction. The problem of poverty has to be addressed if we really want to deal with the problem of violence in communities and the problem of addiction in communities. And we also need to pass laws designed to make sure that the sentencing laws are just and fair, to end this disproportionate and unfair targeting of Black communities, to end these unfair laws that lock nonviolent offenders up behind bars for years upon years, thereby further destroying the community. Those laws have to be changed. And under the Obama administration, they were making steps towards changing various laws. And now what you have is Jeff Sessions taking us backwards. So this is, again, a reminder of just how important voting is. And before I go into that a little bit more, it's important to know just like the scope and the magnitude of this problem of mass incarceration. Michelle Alexander points out in one of her articles, and I'll include a link to that article, that there are more Black men who are behind bars or under the watch of the criminal justice system than there were Black men enslaved in 1850. And that is astonishing. That is ridiculous. And we know that mass incarceration is just a new form of slavery. And there's a great documentary that I encourage you all to watch called 13th. I did a review on that. It's on Netflix. I encourage you to watch it because you will understand the history that's laid out about how the prison system is the new slavery. So this whole situation has to be addressed. And again, we have to understand how important elections are. I told you about the differences between the Obama administration and this Trump administration, between the Justice Department under Eric Holder and the Justice Department under Jeff Sessions. Jeff Sessions is taking us backwards, not only in criminal justice, but in voting rights. And that will probably be the subject of my next video tomorrow about this whole push towards voter suppression. But these elections matter. Elections help determine who's our attorney general, the person responsible for enforcing civil rights in this country. Here you have basically, an analogy can be drawn. This situation with Jeff Sessions as the attorney general is analogous to putting a Klansman in charge of enforcing civil rights in this country. That makes no sense at all. It's analogous to putting a wolf in charge of protecting the hen house. That makes no sense at all. So again, these elections matter, and we really have to be mindful of that. And I will never stop mentioning it for the next 4 years. I'm going to talk about those misleaders who told us that elections don't matter. Every single day, we are reminded of just how wrong and how foolish those misleaders were. So I encourage you all to find out about your elected officials, find out their policy positions when it comes to the war on drugs. Know who your Congress people are, know who your senators are, know what their voting record is, know who your local representatives are, who's your city council person, who's your state representative and your state senator. Know those things. Know their policies, track those policies, and support candidates that support the Black community. So those are my comments on this. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. Peace.